today we are going to recoat a B9 Creator vat. Here we have a vat that's been used several times and it's beginning to get cloudy, and we need to just peel off the PDMS coating, which is what I'm going to do now. I've already kind of broke it loose at the corner, but usually you can get a hold of it like this and just gently peel it out, and sometimes it comes out in pieces, but we want to remove the old coating before we replace the new. And you can kind of see where this image had become burned after several dozen prints of rings that we had done. So now we've taken that out and we're going to toss it out. We don't need it anymore. And then what you want to do is you want to take your vat and just clean it thoroughly, especially the window area where the actual image is projected through. Okay, so we've cleaned our vat up, and we've gotten rid of all the residue. Basically, we just use warm soapy water, but you do want to make sure it's good and dry after cleaning. So I'll set that aside, and let's look at the PDMS kit itself. So this is, brand name is Ssylka 184. It is a product of Dow Corning. You can find it online, and it comes in a ½ kilogram kit. This is the PDMS itself, and then it also comes with a small bottle of catalyst. Now these get mixed in a 10-to-1 ratio. So you're going to want to have a small mixing cup, and here I've just got kind of a medicine cup that is has some graduations on it in milliliters. And I've made a mark there at 45 milliliters because we're going to use 45 milliliters of PDMS roughly to recoat our vat. Because this is a ½ kilogram, we can get about 10 recoatings out of one small kit like this. The other thing I've got is I have a few mixing sticks, and then I just cut myself a piece of cheap plastic as a wiper, and I'm going to use that to help spread the PDMS around, and you'll see that as we do it. So the first thing we're going to want to do is mix up our PDMS. And I always wear gloves because it's not toxic, but it is kind of messy. So I'll go ahead and get those gloves on. All right, we have our gloves on, and we have some paper towels if we need it. I've got my cylinder. We're going to go ahead and first, because it's mixed 10-to-1 and we want 45, we're going to pour out about 40.5, and then we're going to add 4.5. Okay, now we're going to add the catalyst, and that'll bring us up to 45 milliliters approximately. And now what we're going to do is mix thoroughly, and I usually mix this for a couple of minutes because we want that catalyst to be really thoroughly spread throughout the PDMS mixture. And you'll notice as I'm doing this, I'm forming a lot of bubbles, and you might think that bubbles in your PDMS is a bad thing. And you would be correct, but as the PDMS cures, these bubbles will float to the top of the layer and pop, and they won't be a problem in your final coating. All right, we've been mixing the PDMS thoroughly here for about a couple of minutes, and you can see that it almost looks cloudy because there's so many little bubbles, so much foam in it that it's lost its translucency, but it's very thoroughly mixed. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to pour all of this PDMS into what we call the deep side of the vat. The side with the window is what we call the shallow side because it is raised, and when you put resin in here, because this surface is raised, the depth of the resin is shallower on this side than it is on the deep side. So the deep side has no window, the shallow side has the window. The shallow side is where all the action takes place when we're printing an object, so you want that to be good and clear. If you got fingerprints over here on the outside, it wouldn't matter anyway. So I'm pouring it into the deep side. I use my mixing stick to help get as much of it out of the container as I can. It's not super critical that we get 45 milliliters, that's just a close approximation. If you get a little too much or a little bit too little, it's not a big deal. We'll set that aside. Now as I poured that in there, you can kind of see it's settled toward the bottom, but it's mainly over here on what we call the deep side. And what I'm doing is I'm tilting it so that all of the edges now have PDMS touching them. And now we're going to try to move the PDMS over to the shallow end. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to let it all spread out until and we're going to tilt it and everything till the PDMS is in contact with all corners, all the wall corners in the vat. So we got that all touching. We'll get some over here now. and we're just tilting it around there. Now we've got a good coverage. We've got coverage everywhere. But the next thing we want to do is we want to kind of tilt it, and we want the bulk, in fact almost all of the PDMS, we want it to kind of get up here on this shallow end. And to do that, I like to use a scraper. So I'll actually go through and scrape the excess PDMS that's on that deep end over to what we call the shallow end. We really don't need PDMS on the deep end at all, because we never have a part curing on that side, but we do need it to flow back across while it's curing so that we have a good seal and a good flow over the waterfall. If there's not a good seal across the bottom during the printing action, resin will tend to run underneath the PDMS. But it's okay to pretty much wipe as much of that off as you can. Now I'm holding it here tilted, and if there's some big bubbles, you know, you can kind of pop them, but you can see there's still a lot of bubbles and cloudiness, but it's starting to clear up. We'll set that aside. Now the final thing for a good PDMS coating is we want it to cure on a very flat surface. So you will want to set this on a nice level surface, and you can see the PDMS is already starting to flow back towards the deep side, and it will continue to do that. However, as it cures, the PDMS will form a waterfall from the shallow side over to the deep side, from the shallow side over to the deep side, and it's that drop off when we slide the vat that releases the part from the suction force that it would normally occur between two flat surfaces. Finally, I would just like to talk a minute about how long it takes for the PDMS to cure. If you cure it at room temperatures, it takes about 48 hours. And that's a fine way to do it, but it is even better if you have a hot box or a low temperature oven where you can place this item, elevate its temperature no more than 180 degrees Fahrenheit, or you'll start to melt the plastic. But if you can raise that temperature to 150 to 180 degrees Fahrenheit, that will speed up the cure process, and you will have a recoated vat in about 2 hours or less. And we highly recommend that. There's less chance that all of your PDMS will flow out and you'll get a perfectly flat surface, which you don't want. So using elevated temperatures is a good thing. One other tip, you might want to cover this with a box or some enclosure so that while the cure process is taking place, dust and other particles in the atmosphere won't fall onto your important surface over here over the window and cause some flaws in it. So that completes your PDMS recoating. Once this is cured, you're ready to print again. Since this material costs about $70 online, a bottle, you can get about 10 recoatings out of it. That's about $7 a recoating. I've been finding that I need to recoat, depending on the type of print and the number of layers, anywhere from 5 to 20 prints. So you can expect to use this consumable, and it will cost maybe 50 cents to $1 per print.